Right. Not. No one's heard from Safia, have they? Before before we start, I don't suppose. I had any contact. Have you,
No,
Emma?
no.
No. Okay. Well, hopefully she'll join us shortly. Okay. Well, it's 10:15 now, so let's start our meeting in public. Well, welcome everybody to the board of London TravelWatch. There's a public meeting today, and we've got some interesting speakers later today from the Rail Ombudsman. So that'll be the main focus of our sort of external discussion. But we have got some papers to go through before that. So if we can start off with that. Just first of all, just want to check if there's any apologies. Jackie Ballard will be slightly late joining us. She'll arrive in about 15 minutes, but no other apologies that have been received. Are there any declarations of interest that anybody has since the last meeting? Okay. So we'll move on then to my just a short discussion or statement of what I've been doing. We have had well, a busy time. It's always busy at the moment within London TravelWatch. A lot of work going on with Transport Focus and with the Assembly. Anthony Smith, who's with us today from Transport Focus, and I appeared at the Transport Committee of the London Assembly a short while ago, back in, well, it seems it's quite a long time now, at the end of July. And we had a very good session, a very open discussion about the work that we're doing, and they were very keen to know about how we're measuring the work that's going forward. I think they were pleased to hear that there's more measurement of the successes and recognition if there's anything that's not coming up to plan, that we've got ways of spotting that. And I know through Emma's director's report later, we'll get a feel for things that are going well, things that need more work. So I think they were keen to hear about that. And I felt, and Anthony, by all means chip in because you were alongside me on this one. I felt the mood of the meeting was good, and some very open questions, and certainly a lot of interest in the work that's been done around the Zip card and concessionary travel. So as I say, I felt there was a good rapport during that meeting. We've had a number of meetings with Assembly members. Clearly, there's a lot of discussion at the moment around budgets, around the Mayor's budget, and that's taking up a lot of Assembly members' time. And clearly, we need to be alongside the Assembly in knowing what the plans are. A lot of that obviously depends on discussion between the government and the Mayor's office. But you know, we need to be involved in that because there will be an impact on all organisations within the London Assembly. So we've had discussions with Assembly members around that. We've also had a lot of good discussions with Transport for London. I think those meetings are becoming more and more regular, and I think having a greater impact in terms of our work. We're able to challenge, I think, in the appropriate way. And Emma and other members of the team are watching very closely things that are happening within Transport for London during a very a period of great turmoil and an unprecedented time in terms of planning. But we've been able to offer, I think, a lot of assistance in terms of communication with the public, and I know Emma will talk more in her report on that. But I've felt the meetings have been they've been done in the right spirit. I think there's an openness from Transport for London to hear what we've got to say. They can't do everything that we ask, obviously, but we'll keep pushing at the things that we feel are right for users. So I found those meetings extremely useful. And of course, the work with Transport Focus has been going on apace. Several of you have been involved in joint projects with Transport Focus. I had an interesting question and answer session with fellow board members from Scotland and Wales, where we were able to give staff and board members a view of how we work as sort of quite specific parts, members with quite specific responsibilities for an area such as London, Scotland, and Wales. So that was a good session. So those are really the areas that I've been working on. Everything, of course, has been remote. I hope one day we'll get around to actually meeting people face to face, but that's going to be a little while off. But there's been some good meetings and good discussions in the last few weeks. So if anyone's got any questions, particularly around that work, I'm happy to discuss. Okay, right. So moving on, perhaps we can just go through the minutes of the last meeting of the 16th of June. It seems quite a long time ago, but if people can just let me know if there's any concerns or additions they want to make to those minutes. No?
No, nothing to add.
That's
Thanks,
good.
Arthur.
Okay. Yes, everyone else can shake their hands, and Laura, yes, if you let me know, but shake their heads. But so Luke, thank you for putting together those minutes. They're very thorough, so I'll sign those off. And if we could just move on to matters arising, there were just three matters arising, I think. So bear with me a second. Yes, so the risk register was one of the key elements. That is still ongoing, and we'll have a discussion on that a little later when we have our private session. I think there's been good progress. I know Karen in particular has made some challenges, and I think rightly so. We've got to look carefully at what we are putting on the risk register and make sure that it stands up to scrutiny. But I think we have made some good progress, and we can talk that through a little later. And we've had a full explanation now of the TfL decision to close Clapham South. Does that do board members see that as a complete action now? It looks as if the response is useful. Has anybody got anything to say on that? Okay.
Looks as though it was just circumstances.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. So I think they've come up with a helpful explanation there. And then finally, the finance manager is going to share the information with us on a monthly basis. So that's a sort of move forward. So board members will have regular updates on the financial position. So thank you to the finance team for preparing that. Okay, so I think they're the main issues from the previous meeting. Has anybody got anything they want to add? Okay, right, well, let's move on then to Emma's report as director. Emma, do you want to talk us through the report at all, or at least introduce it, and then we can discuss?
Yeah, thank you. I'll give you some headlines. So we introduced, this is the second time we've had this dashboard, which represents the main objectives in the kind of interim business plan that we agreed earlier this year. So there are many more greens on the dashboard this time around, which I think is a really good sign. Still 2 reds. That one's to do with an office move, which isn't able to happen at the moment because of the pandemic, and also the work on the bus that we were planning on doing before the pandemic. But that may well restart, having several kind of positive conversations with TfL, who are also considering bus as a priority area of concern for them going forward. So this is really a quarter where we've just been getting a lot of positive feedback, which is really good. Really positive feedback about our casework team, positive feedback from London Assembly members, and some positive feedback from Transport for London as well about our engagement with them. And this quarter, we've made a particular amount of progress on our advocacy work. So, for example, our work has resulted in really big improvements in Transport for London's communication to passengers during the pandemic. We've launched our Active Travel Have You Say guide, which is proving really popular. We are already building up our new digital community. As I speak, we've got 1,900 people who have given us their email addresses to potentially be part of our community. So that's going really well. Our under 18s interviews that we did with young people across London led to a very useful report that's been widely praised. Our pressure on Eurostar has helped to make their refunds policy clearer. We released our map, which shows where Thameslink stations are on the tube map, and that's gone down very well as well. Also in this quarter, we've got the trial of 24/7 bus lanes that we have, something that we've been calling for a long time. We've got a massively increased media profile over the last 3 months. And, you know, in terms of kind of ongoing and upcoming work, we're currently analysing the transport needs of Londoners as we go forward and hopefully kind of come out of the pandemic. So in terms of advocacy, those are some of the things that we've achieved in the last 3 months. On the kind of more organisational objectives, our IT migration project is now complete, which is really fantastic news with great benefits for us and great benefits for collaboration between London TravelWatch and Transport Focus. The objective setting process is pretty much finished in terms of kind of restarting our appraisal system, and we've made some great strides on our wellbeing plan for staff as well. And then in terms of the part of our chart that's around improving relationships with key stakeholders, our relationship with Transport Focus goes from strength to strength. Our relationship with Transport for London is getting stronger and stronger. I've got 4 separate meetings with TfL this week alone, and over the during the time when the children were going back to school in the last week or so, we had daily updates from TfL on how school buses were running. So that's a real kind of measure of how much that relationship's really kind of grown and developed. And also we've been having a lot more contact and very positive contacts with the London Assembly. In terms of kind of casework and complaints, the handover of Transport Focus complaints handling to London TravelWatch has gone really smoothly, and that's going very well. And our work has been delivered within our expected budget. So that's also good news too. So I think I'll end it there, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Going on, which is very, oh, hang on.
I can hear
Right.
you now.
Can you hear me now? Sorry, thanks Emma for that. There's a huge amount going on at the moment, which is you know, just very, very useful to hear. Can I just ask one question specifically on the Have You Say guide? How is that being dealt with at the moment, and how are we getting responses to that?
So on that particular, I might call in Richard in a moment, but on that particular measurement, it's not possible, because in the Have You Say guide, we published the email addresses for TfL and every borough who are dealing with the streetscape changes.
Yeah.
So we're not able to monitor how many people are emailing those contacts, but we are doing some measurement of visits to that web page. Richard, is there anything additional that you want to say on that?
Yeah, I haven't got the exact stats in front of me. I think it's fairly popular. Yeah, it's one of the documents that people are viewing you know, quite a lot on our website. But yeah, as Emma said, it's the way we're not necessarily trying to get traffic on our website from that. Is once people have read that, it's directing people to the relevant relevant people so they can make the reports that they need to make.
Okay. It might be useful at some stage, not necessarily immediately, but if we have the contact with these organisations to find out what level of interest they're getting. It may not be statistical, but I think it'd be useful just to know what if people are following through that advice, whether it be through councils or whatever. But that's probably for some time in the future. Alan, you've got your hand up.
I do, please. A couple of questions, Emma. I note you have made plans for people to return to the office. Is there any scope for board members to drop in, and is that acceptable? Come and say hello and contribute. The other question I got is the diversity and inclusion objectives that you've added. Could you just expand on what that is a little bit, please?
Yeah, sure. So we're reopening our office on Monday, or that's our hope. We've done risk assessments with 3 members of staff who want to come back. We've got a risk assessment to do with 1 member of staff who's been away. And the maximum number of people we can have in the office safely is 3. And so with those staff members are going on a rota system, and will be sitting at, spatially distanced from each other. And there are various other kind of measures in place. So there won't be an opportunity for board members to drop in, because it's very carefully managed to make sure that we only have 3 people in the office at any one time. But if you were to get in touch with Richard or Luke, they could certainly look at the rota, and they might be able to kind of tell you whether there's a space for you on the particular day that you're thinking of coming in, because people would absolutely love to see you. So is that okay on that question? Brilliant. And on the diversity and inclusion objectives, this is something that I've brought in at other organisations that I've worked in, and found it extremely kind of popular and effective for kind of improving workplace culture. Because what it does is it doesn't just wait for the management team to decide what it's going to do to increase diversity and inclusion. It means that there are more ideas and initiatives that can take place, that staff members can suggest. So everybody, I'm not able to at the moment to share, unless anybody on this call wants to share their diversity and inclusion objective, which they could do. At the moment, where I'm not able to share people's objectives with everybody else, but everybody's got one that's based around something that they're interested in, or something that they think would be good for the organisation, that would improve our working culture and make it more inclusive, for example. Does that sound okay? Does anybody, Richard, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I wonder whether you might want to mention your particular objective, because I think that would be a good example.
Very happy to. Yeah, so Luke and I have got the objective included in our appraisals that we will do more to find out about best practice for communicating with those who might have sight problems with the sight, or partially sighted, blind, people with disabilities, and in terms of making subtitles available on any videos we do, just trying to be more inclusive in the way that we communicate. And there's stuff's changing all the time, guidelines are changing all the time, and best practice is changing all the time. We want to tap into it, all the partner organisations that we know, and make use of that best practice so that we can best represent all passengers and all transport users. That's what we're here to do.
And that's particularly relevant because we're upgrading our website, or those plans are underway at the moment.
That's helpful. Thank you.
That's really helpful and very interesting, because I think having it focused on individuals and what individuals can do and want to do themselves is the way forward. There's nothing worse than a corporate diversity plan that sits in some unviewed file on the system. So it's great when individuals are doing their own thing, and Richard's is a good example. I think it will have a sort of dynamism of its own. So that's I'm very excited by that, and perhaps we should be doing it as board members as well. Perhaps we can have a separate discussion on that and see what our individual ambitions might be. So no, that's helpful. Thank you, Emma. Karen, I'm not sure, were you applauding or were you had a hand up?
Putting my hand up. There's only an applause or a thumbs up, so applause seems to be the most appropriate mechanism to catch your attention. A couple of things, Emma, around complaint handling. One is an observation you've got to ensure the Ombudsman is working as an amber. You might want to reframe that as an objective. It's not your job to make sure that the Ombudsman is working. It's not within your gift, so perhaps reframe that a little bit. And the other question was, do you want to make any observations about complaints over the last couple of months and how you see complaints coming for the next few months?
Karen, can we save that one to the casework reports about the complaints, if you don't mind? And I'm aware that Susan isn't here either. So but Mike's kind of standing in for her. Would that be all right if we move that one to that section? And I take on board what you're saying about the Ombudsman objective. The full objectives are obviously in the paper that the board approved a few months ago, and those are just shortened versions of them that just kind of fit the word count on the screen. So but you're right, that's not our responsibility.
Okay, Jackie, and then Abdi.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, Emma, that I wasn't here at the beginning of your report. I'm down in deepest Somerset with various logistical issues. So the question I had particularly, I mean, I thought it was a really good comprehensive report, was about the e-scooter trials. And I probably should know the answer to this, but where are they taking place? I mean, where are they being encouraged to be used? Is it on roads or is it on pavements?
So, Jackie, it's absolutely on roads, and
Right.
you know, that's one of the things that will be evaluated in the trial, of kind of how well that's working, and whether people are actually following the rules on that. So there aren't any trials currently in London, but I know several boroughs are interested in taking part in the trial, including the City of London. And so, yeah, we've been having some conversations with people about those trials and how they could be more joined up across London, so that you don't end up, riding your scooter in one borough and then having to leave it because you can't ride through the next borough to get to work or what have you. So, but yeah, absolutely on the road and not the pavement.
Okay, Abdi, did you want to ask a point?
Yeah, thank you, Emma. My question is about I know you had a meeting with TfL with regards to the proposed increase in bus fares. I know you said that you've spoken to them and suggested that they should keep the fares as low as possible. Did they listen to your concerns?
Hi, Abdi. Yeah, that absolutely was taken on board, and what was agreed at the time was that we would have a follow-up meeting when TfL had a better idea of how the government wanted them to implement the 2.6% fares rise. But when I brought it up in a meeting with TfL yesterday with Vernon Everett, he suggested that ultimately it was going to be a mayoral decision on how fares would rise. So I'm going to be taking that up with Heidi Alexander, who's the Deputy Mayor for Transport, when she's back from her holiday, because I think it might be that we need to talk to more than one stakeholder about this.
Thank you.
Okay, and just if I could ask Emma about the work and relationships and collaborations with other organisations, do you want to talk that through a little bit more as to where you see that going? And I know a lot of work's already underway, but perhaps a bit more on that.
I mean, I think we're at the start here, really, of a process, Arthur, and I think London TravelWatch has worked with other organisations, collaborated with other organisations in the past, but I think we want to do more of that, and we want to reach out to potentially organisations and individuals who we might not have worked before with, including maybe some kind of unusual suspects. So that is a piece of work that's ongoing, but people we've met with so far we've had a couple of good meetings with London First. We've had a really good initial meeting with Centre for London, where there's potential for more collaboration going forward. Had a good meeting with the new London director of Sustrans recently. And I think, as we kind of move forward on a piece of work that's really trying to kind of map out and work out what the future transport needs of Londoners are going to be, there's absolutely massive scope for talking to all kinds of people that we might not have spoken to before in trying to help us figure out the answers to that question, as well as new insights that we're going to get from our new community of transport users.
Yeah. Good. And Anthony?
Arthur, just on Jackie's point about e-scooters, it's worth pointing out that there are trials going on in other cities as well. The West Midlands is doing a very big trial on e-scooters, but I did notice in the news this morning that Coventry, which I think is running a separate trial on e-scooters, has actually suspended it after a week. I don't know why, but it might just be worth finding out. And secondly, just thinking about other organisations, Arthur, I think it's worth getting on the record that the partnership between TravelWatch and Transport Focus is working extremely well. I think both in terms of the practical issues like the IT changes, but also the policy and external comms issues. It's very, very positive. So that continues to motor forward.
Good. Thank you, Anthony, for that. Funny enough, I was, after we'd asked questions, I was going to ask you to say a bit about the links between the two. So, so thanks, you've preempted that. And I think, you know, bearing in mind where we've all been in the last 6 months, I think setting up a partnership remotely is, to say the least, challenging. No one envisaged this when we signed the collaboration agreement back in February, and within a month we were suddenly thrown into this very odd world. And the easy thing, I think, would have been to say, oh, it's all too difficult, and let's just keep our heads down and we'll catch up with each other at some point in the future. I don't feel that's happened at all. I feel that everybody has really pushed forward and tried to create opportunities to work together. So, you know, credit to everybody within London TravelWatch and of course Transport Focus for keeping that going, because as I say, the easy thing would have been to shut our eyes, put blinkers on and just carry on as before. So so really good work, and a lot more to come. I think that when we can actually be in the same room as each other, who knows where we're going to get to. It's but maybe somewhere away yet. Alan, I think you have your hand up, or did have.
I was just going to say, I think the Coventry e-scooter trial has been suspended because people are riding on the pavement rather than on the roads. I think it's also worth noting that I think last month the trial in Middlesbrough was paused for a similar reason, but as I understand it, that's now restarted. So these things are going on all over the country,
Yeah.
And it will be interesting to see just where they end up.
Absolutely, and I think it will be the case that, yes, I mean, London perhaps often believes it is leading the country in so many things. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not, and I think we should, as Anthony suggested, let's keep our eyes open to what's happening elsewhere, because it may be that the lead is taken by other authorities or in other areas. We may pick up information from that. So I think the work with Transport Focus is going to be important around that. Okay. Anything else anyone wants to ask Emma on her comprehensive report? It does, I think a lot of questions are answered in that report. So thank you, Emma, for making it so clear. But anything else anyone wants to pursue? No? Okay. Well, thank you, Emma. That's really helpful. And I think as we've got a little time before our guests arrive, I wonder if we could perhaps skip onto one other item. Richard, if you feel able at this stage to do your impact report, we could do that. How's that? And then we'll come on to the casework a little later.
Yep. Thanks, Arthur. Yeah. I'll assume you've read the report as always. There are obviously quite a few good impacts that I touch upon in that. Emma's already talked about a few of them, but things like there are a few things like our warnings to TfL about the opening of pubs and restaurants that caused TfL to change their guidance. Emma's mentioned the 24/7 bus lanes, but we got quite a lot of good coverage around the fairs increase announcement. Including a piece in the Guardian there. We've had a lot of broadcast interviews, radio and TV, far more than we're normally used to. So that's Emma's done really well on those, I think, and getting our name out there. Website views, as I think I said in the last report, it's very interesting. They seem to be mirroring the slow return to public transport. So we obviously had a massive drop in our website views in March, and it started to recover. So April, May, and August they continue to recover. And I'll send you some more detailed website figures insight at the end of the quarter. There's been some good social media interaction as well. we publish our travel hacks, which Emma's touched on as well, which put the Thames Link and Tube services in one place for the sort of first time. But we've been drip feeding the various different other travel hacks on social media, and that's been going down quite well. And we've also had a bit of a new departure. We've been using Facebook as part of our active travel campaign. We're using Facebook anyway to try and get hook in people who are potentially interested in joining our user panel. But as a result of that, we've got a new Facebook presence, and all our tweets are being carefully adapted and used on posted to Facebook. So that's engaging a whole new audience potentially. So there'll be more on that in future reports. But I think that's a really exciting departure. As Emma said, our active travel campaign, we're adding probably about 100 users a day at the moment. So we've got almost 1,900 email addresses, and that's in addition to the ones we've already had for our newsletter. So we'll consolidate those all in, and there's work on the new website. So it's all moving in the right direction and really upping our game digitally. So I think that's really a sort of positive summary of my report. If you've got any questions, very happy to answer them.
Okay, I don't see any hands raised, but I do now. So Anthony and then Jackie, please.
Richard, what's the advantage you see from going onto Facebook?
Well, I think there's potentially a different audience of people. I think people who look at Twitter, they're a different type of person. Facebook people might be it's people who don't want to go on Twitter necessarily. Different types of people. It might be people with families more, perhaps. It might be. I think Twitter sometimes it's a bit of a sort of narrow audience, perhaps. Not quite all intellectuals, but it's people who want to share. People who perhaps living in a Twitter bubble. I think Facebook's probably a bit more of a mass communication opportunity, and we'll see who these people are. But and we'll see when we find out a bit more about our digital community, who the people we've been attracting through Facebook are. But initially, I think Facebook used to be for younger people. It perhaps picks up a lot of older people. But hopefully, between the two, Twitter and Facebook, will be able to reach wider audience. And if we're doing things already, then it's just another platform. It's not that much more work to get the information there as well, make it more accessible.
Jackie.
Thanks. Yeah, just picking up on that point. I think a lot of people find Twitter quite aggressive and confrontational, and so they either step down their engagement or stop looking at it for weeks at a time and things like that, whereas Facebook isn't quite as bad in that sense. I mean, you also probably, I expect, have thought about Instagram, which I don't particularly use, but I know lots of people who do, and that seems to be another audience altogether. Although from what I can see, it seems to be quite a kind of middle class, look at me, show offy type audience, and but that's because I don't look at the young people doing the showing off stuff. But anyway, it may well be that there's quite different audiences for different social media platforms, and I'm not any kind of expert on that, obviously. It's a really good report, and there's some really good work that we're doing, and where we're rightly taking credit for things. I'm assuming that it's a public report and will be on our website, therefore can be read by other people. So the only quibble I've got is that in that first item, when we talk about TfL and changing guidance when people were returning to work, when pubs and so on were reopening, and we've forced them to change their guidance. I don't think we can force anybody to do anything. And they, reading that, they might take a bit of umbrage at the idea that they were forced. I think they might be rather happier if we said persuaded, and it might be a bit more accurate. So that's, I mean, it's a small quibble, but it's just thinking about the language we use and how other people might interpret it. And it doesn't help us to have a good relationship with them, I suspect, if we use language like forcing a lot.
No, that's very good point, Jackie.
Yeah. Thank you.
And yeah, there's some learning on this. But sorry, Richard.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'll take that point. And I think we're trying to shout from the rooftops more about our successes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, perhaps we've been perhaps gone slightly too far there, but yes, we want to. We definitely believe that we really push them on that and encourage them to change their guidance. Yeah.
Okay, no, that's a good point. Thank you. Alan, you did have your hand raised. You still want to add something?
So I was just going to comment on the travel hacks, and particularly, I think one of the problems that operators have is that they stand in isolation. And I noticed that one of the achievements that you've listed, Richard, is actually getting key stations, the Thameslink map, to include the tube stations. And I think that's a really important mixing of operators. And I just think we could make more of a claim for that as an achievement.
Yeah, I think we have sort of tried to claim it. Perhaps we can do more. But yeah, it's an accessible option as well, isn't it? The Thameslink option that we're showing there. So yeah, a bit of a new departure for us. But yeah, if you've got any more ideas how we can get it out there, we're certainly willing to listen. But yeah, perhaps we can do a little bit more.
Yeah, I think on that one, it's Alan. It's particularly new, isn't it? It's only quite recent that we've got that on, and obviously we'll see. Hopefully, we'll be able to see how that develops. But yeah, we should make the most of any of these changes that we've achieved. Out of interest, have we had any response or comeback from Transport for London on that in terms of the map? Nothing.
Arthur,
Emma's trying
I'm trying to wave my hand up, but I don't think you can see me.
I thought it was 0. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, I mean that idea kind of came about through conversations with assembly members around why those Thameslink stations weren't on the tube map. It's something that the Transport Committee had asked for previously, and I raised it with TfL. They were very unwilling to do so, and so we came up with the idea of kind of doing the map ourselves by way of maybe kind of trying to put a little bit of additional pressure on them and see if they might change their mind. But yeah, haven't had indications yet. I mean, I know that map circulated kind of widely around TfL, but I'm not sure yet kind of whether there's a kind of a rethink going on that one. Over.
Okay. Laura, I will come to you 1 second, but Anthony, just briefly.
Just on the same subject, we had a go at the same issue from the train point of view. Must have been a couple of years ago now, but because of course our office is in Blackfriars, which is at the centre of that kind of Bermuda Triangle, where the tubes are all in the wrong place, and therefore the Thameslink route is incredibly useful. And not having it on the route map, especially when it reconnected to London Bridge, then back up to St Pancras, it's mad. But we understood at the time it was simply to do with revenue, that TfL didn't want to share the revenue with the national rail operators. So we're very, very unconvinced about putting it on the map, which doesn't really seem to put passengers first. But now the government's in charge of quite a lot of this. Maybe the government could sort of poke somebody and get this done once and for all, because this is not putting passengers first. It really isn't.
No, and what I really liked about this, and Tim in particular will know the history of this. I mean, this does go back years, as it actually says, over a couple of years. I think it goes back 5 or more years that we've been pushing for this. And clearly, there's never been anything we felt we could do if there's a revenue issue, that there wasn't anything that could be done. To Emma's credit and colleagues' credit, we've decided to take it into our own hands and make an arrangement with a different map altogether, and that's given the opportunity to do this. But so it's a good example, I think, where we don't just take no for an answer. We do things in the appropriate way and can take things forward. So I think credit to everybody. Tim, did you want to add anything on that? I know you've been involved with this for years, been frustrated at this, but anything you want to add?
This has gone on for decades, unfortunately. And yes, TfL have dug themselves into a very deep rut with this. and it will take them quite an effort to actually get out of that. But just to say, we did actually, when we wrote to Gilligan, about TfL some months ago, we did actually suggest that they could take the initiative and persuade TfL through the negotiation process over the bailout, that they should ask them to do just that, put the thing on the map.
That's true, yeah, and I don't think we had a formal response to that, but we'll keep pushing, because clearly we've taken one route, but there are other ways of doing this and actually getting it on the map. But Emma, yes.
I mean, of course, TfL want to go kind of one step further, or take an alternative route, if you like, and actually kind of take over those services from Thameslink themselves. So that thinking, they're putting their business case together for that at the moment. Yeah.
But anyway, I think it's really good work, and shows that we're prepared to take a little bit of risk, take a bit of action, and it's come off well, I think. So that's excellent. Laura, sorry, you've been very patient there with your hand raised. Please.
Thanks, Arthur. It was just a quick one, going back to the earlier point on Facebook and Instagram. So on the Facebook side, I was interested to know, Richard, you mentioned that we're obviously doing well attracting people, and interested to know what they're opting into when they join us. So I assume they're joining the campaign, but are they also giving us ongoing permission to email them for their newsletter? I think you said maybe they are, so it'd be good if you could just confirm that for me in a second. And also interesting on Jackie's point on Instagram, because as I understand it, because they use the same platform, it's relatively easy once you know who your key kind of target responsive group is on Facebook, to then go for the same people who may have stopped using Facebook and instead being on Instagram. So interested to know your thoughts on that.
Okay, yeah. Thanks, Laura. Essentially, we've got this targeted advertising campaign using Facebook. So people are drawn in through a survey or a quiz now, and they'll then, if they're interested, they'll go on and fill in their email address and give us their name, and say that they're willing to be contacted in future. We're sending out regular weekly newsletters about active travel at the moment, but also they're opting in, yes, to receive other information like newsletters, things like that. And then later down the line, we're talking about at the moment, we'll aim to try and find out more about those people. So we build up a body of knowledge about them. Are they a bus user? Are they a train user? Where do they live? What sort of journeys do they make? So that we can make more in-depth assumptions and test it out and find out what they think. Because that's obviously the way we need to go to gain more evidence. Moving on to the other point, Instagram, it's something we can explore. We probably want to walk before we run, because Facebook is a very new departure. We hadn't really got much knowledge of it before, and we're gaining that now, building it up. We had obviously a very low base on Facebook, no real presence, and we're now slowly gaining in momentum. But no, Instagram, that they obviously are, they are the same. Instagram's owned by Facebook, so we can explore the possibilities in the future. It's definitely not something we've ruled out.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm sure it's not a tomorrow priority, but a thought for the future.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you. Thanks, Richard.
Day after tomorrow, Richard, is fine. Thank you. Excellent. No, a really good report. Thank you, Richard, and a lot going on. And I do like the idea of attributing sort of success, and it's not about overclaiming. And I absolutely take Jackie's point. We've got to be careful with our language, but I think it's very good that we do capture the successes we've had. So well done on that. It's really good.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks for that. I'm delighted to welcome our guests this morning, to Billy Quinn and Judith Turner from the Rail Ombudsman. Can you hear us, Judith and Billy?
Yes,
loud and clear.
That's good to hear. That's good to hear. Well, welcome to the meeting, which I think is a public meeting. So if we do get any questions from the public, obviously we'll pass those through as well. But primarily, it's an opportunity for you to to talk to us, and it'd be very helpful, coming up to the 2-year point of the scheme, to know where we are and where we're hoping to go to. Clearly, everything's been very disrupted in the last 6 months. It goes almost without saying, but be useful to hear your thoughts on where things have got to, and particularly how we can work together moving forward, both ourselves and Transport Focus. Clearly, we've had a lot of experience in working with customers, customer complaints, and feedback, and trying to bring about improvement in the industry, which I'm sure is what you're about as well. So I'd just like to welcome you, just so that everybody knows that Billy's Managing Director and Judith, the Deputy Chief Ombudsman. So I'm happy to open the floor to yourselves.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, and thank you to Arthur Leafley for giving us the opportunity to come and provide an update. I'm actually joined by Judith, the Chief Ombudsman, and I've also invited Paul Harrison along, who is our Chief Analyst, so he looks after all the data. Because hopefully what we'd like to do is set some context for where we are, but also from try and give some update in terms of some of the numbers and some of the trends which Paul's kindly gonna do for us. And then obviously from your perspective, there's an element of answering questions. It'd be remiss of me not also to mention Susan James, who has been very, very supportive over the course of our brief history. It's actually 1 year and 9 months. So unlike your organisation that's got 20 years under its belt, we're still fairly fledgling in the rail industry, although we do have 22 years experience as an ombudsman. Obviously for the rail industry, you know, we recognise there's still an element of learning, and Susan's been fantastic in her support. She supports a rail liaison panel, which actually engages our independent rail board, and she's also very active with the Scheme Council, which, as well as looking at the scrutiny of the Ombudsman, also looks to support the Ombudsman and tries to ensure that it remains independent. And she's been very valuable to us in terms of her experience and her support. So I know she's actually on holiday at the moment, but I'm sure you'll pass on our regards. What we'd like to start by doing is I'm going to hand over to Judith, and Judith's going to set some context in terms of the Ombudsman, a brief introduction to the Rail Ombudsman. I know that many of you have knowledge already. The difference between an Ombudsman and an ADR scheme. She's also going to talk about how we help passengers, but also then to go on to talk about how we try and help the industry to raise standards, because obviously from a context point of view, whereas you are consumer champions, we have a responsibility with consumers and the industry in equal measure, which obviously is one of our primary differences. So I'm going to hand over to Judith now, the Deputy Chief Ombudsman, and she's going to try and set some context. Hopefully we can share some slides to do that.
Thank you. Am I able to share my screen to share some slides? Is that possible?
Yes, that's fine. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. If you just bear with me while I do the technical bit, then. So if I go. So slideshow. Can everybody see that? Yep.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so I thought a good place to start today would be with a walkthrough of some of the highlights of our annual review that sets quite a lot of the context about what an ombudsman is and you know the endeavours to have impact in the sector in the first year of its operation. And you'll see there a slide that I used historically when I was explaining kind of where the Ombudsman came from there, just as a little subheading in terms of why the industry wanted a rail ombudsman in the first place. That arose out of several important factors, one of which is that some of the perceived differences between an ombudsman and other types of ADR scheme, because there are certain features of an ombudsman that differentiates it from other ADR models. Its remit is wider than the dispute before it. So in addition to looking at the cases that individual consumers bring to us about the rail service providers who are members of the scheme, we also have a role to improve standards in this sector and provide feedback, training, and identify themes, which we do under several different mechanisms of which I'll come on to. Ultimately, therefore, an ombudsman more widely works with businesses to prevent harms before they arise. So effectively, you make the dispute resolution function ideally redundant if we live in an ideal world where the feedback and recommendations are taken on board to prevent future occurrences of the same issue. And, you know, we had some early success with that in the scheme in terms of recommendations that we made even before, even before essentially we were able to take cases in the first couple of months of the scheme, where we highlighted some failed passenger assist issues at a London station, where the rail service provider in question saw 4 cases of failed passenger assist from the same consumer, identified a training need, put that in hand straight away, and resolved the issue that and probably several other consumers were all having. So that's a very early example that we've been able to build on and make those recommendations more effective, which I'll come on to. Another key difference in terms of our approach and an ombudsman generally, our approach to alternative dispute resolution is the inquisitorial approach that we're bound to take. So we can't just necessarily consider the evidence that's been put forward. We'll also seek what's missing, and particularly with regards to a consumer, in order to guide them through the process and what they might need to establish their case. So we'll assist the parties gather the evidence so that they can make an effective case, and that's particularly relevant to consumers who are potentially vulnerable. Another key difference is, whilst we'll have regard to the relevant law, we can also take into account non-legal factors. So when we're deciding the outcome of a case, we can look at what's fair and reasonable, what's practical, what's proportionate, and what actually resolves the case for the consumer. And there are several places within our process where we endeavour to bring the parties back together. So that's initially when the application is first raised, but also through our mediation. So we're, during that mediation, we'll find out what the consumer wants, what's driving the complaint from their perspective, and see if there are any offers there that the rail service provider wants to make in order to resolve it at the earliest possible point in time. So that's just a little bit of an overview as to what an ombudsman essentially is. Here's an overview of some of the ways in which the rail ombudsman assists passengers, and we're accessible through several different formats. So passengers can raise their complaints with us through lots of different mechanisms. We even had one potential request for a complaint to be raised via video, and I have to say that predates the last 6 months, where that's become more of the norm. And I don't think we would have thought twice about it after this last 6 month period that we've been in, where we're all video conferencing. But this was last year, and video was a format that this particular passenger was comfortable with, and we offered them the opportunity to provide their application to us via video. So whatever the best way for the passenger to put their point of view, we will endeavour to respond to that in order to make sure that they can be heard in their complaint. We're a single point of contact for consumers. So as you're aware, we operate a single front door for the industry, which means that we may triage cases across to London TravelWatch and Transport Focus. We are free of charge to consumers, as we have to be as an ombudsman. Process for them to escalate their complaints when they've got nowhere with the RSPs the rail service providers' complaints handling process. And as I said before, we have that inquisitorial approach. We're also able to offer binding decisions to consumers. So if they are satisfied with either an offer that's been made at mediation, or they're happy to accept our adjudicated decision, and they do so, then that becomes binding on the rail operator. So again, it's a point in time. It's a closure to a case if they are happy to accept it. Although, as with other ADR mechanisms, it's not the last point of call if they want to take that further, so they can take it to court. So they're never precluded from going to court by having gone through our process. In fact, actually, the civil procedure rules encourage them to go via an ADR process first. And then we have that important remit to increase and raise standards across the industry to provide greater consumer confidence. And one of the discussions that we had very, very early on with the DFT was that it's not just about the person travelling, it's to increase confidence, to encourage the potential traveller, the potential passenger to travel. So it plays several different very important functions, the Ombudsman's remit to raise standards. So what sort of complaints do we cover? This is just a general overview, but we look at train delays and cancellations, customer service issues, the impact of a single incident, for example, of overcrowding, information that passengers are given about specific journeys during disruption, engineering works, etc., the availability or access to station facilities, quality of services available on the train that they might encounter on a particular journey, and then passenger assist facilities for customers with disabilities and issues that arise under the Equality Act. And what sort of remedies can we award? Well, I've already said our remedies can be quite flexible and not necessarily tailored in law. In fact, actually under the Consumer Rights Act, one of the remedies for a consumer where their services have failed them is repeat performance, and that's not always necessarily the right resolution for a passenger who might not necessarily need to travel again. So we can look at an explanation, what went wrong and why, and that's a really important mechanism to increase that consumer confidence in travelling again in the future, because if they understand what went wrong and know that it's not necessarily a systemic issue that they're facing into, it was just something that went wrong, a mistake that was made on the day, that can really help. An acknowledgement that there was or is a problem. Again, you know, somebody that's received correspondence all the way through that doesn't acknowledge what they encountered and that there was a problem can be very powerful in allowing the consumer to close the case down in their own mind. And an apology can also not necessarily just be verbal or written, but a gesture that makes that apology more meaningful. So we've seen lots of examples of those. I think it goes to treating passengers as individuals, consumers and human beings. That can really, really help. So tickets, replacement tickets or vouchers for tickets, we can award obviously a refund, complimentary travel, and compensation where that's appropriate as well. So a whole raft or range of remedies. And if something quite different or practical resolves it for the consumer and the rail operator is able to do that, then, you know, if the parties agree on that, then we're able to look at flexible remedies along the way. So, as I've said, an ombudsman plays an important role in helping the industry raise standards, and we do that through several important mechanisms, and I'll talk you through some of those now. So obviously casework, you can have a lot of information from an individual case in terms of what the passengers experienced, what the outcomes are. We can make recommendations. Again, we've had some good successes with recommendations. We keep a record of them and we share them not only with the individual service providers, but also more widely with them as a collective. We've made recommendations on complaints handling, staff training, accessibility issues, the provision of information. And in fact, you know, in some of those instances, especially where action's been taken, we have seen a reduction in similar complaints, which is what you'd want to see as an ombudsman. So that's an important area of knowledge sharing, not only with the rail service providers, but also more widely with the industry, such as yourselves, the ORR. We're a City and Guilds approved training centre, and have rolled out accredited training to the industry. So we run a 2-day City and Guilds training course. 1 day deals with legalities. The second day deals with customer service issues, and they dovetailed really nicely. And we had some real success last year. We're currently looking at how to get that online so that we can keep the momentum going with that, because actually that was something that we got some good feedback from, and I know that the information was taken back and shared with colleagues. We run satisfaction surveys and obviously reviews and feedback to the industry through certain important mechanisms, such as the complaints working group that I know Susan attends with us. We publish case studies. We've recently published some further case studies from the original ones, and there were ones published in our annual review. So that again helps. With the case studies, what we try to do is take the learnings from the individual case and look at an individual decision, but also highlight where we've made recommendations to the train operator, or actually what the consumer could have done differently to have helped them establish their claim if they've not succeeded on that occasion. So we try to again give some kind of guidance through those case studies. And actually, one of the case studies that resonated particularly with me, that's in our annual review, was about a young person travelling who received a penalty fare through not knowing that a ticket machine had been put in the ticket office the week before, and it struck me that there was a lot of scope for increasing the amount of information, but disseminating it in a way that was actually more focused and targeted. So we looked at what was called the Rail Bylaw campaign, but what we're taking forwards as the Young Person's Train Guide, with partners such as London TravelWatch, Transport Focus, the ORR and others. So again, that's something that we're taking forward as a result of a case study, a recommendation, but actually some action from the RSPs themselves who, on hearing this, saw an opportunity to improve what they do and how they do it. Again, raising their own standards, which is, as an ombudsman, is what we'd want to see. And 2020, not quite the year we all expected it to be. So we are continually evolving and changing the way in which we disseminate the information. So we have a digital webinar offering, and we're running the first of a series of webinars about the industry arrangements and the Consumer Rights Act. So we'll take one of the case studies and we'll carry it through and give some guidance as to what the law might say, what the case law might say about it. So we're running that through as a webinar to give the industry a greater understanding and more knowledge about the issues that consumers face and how they are positioned to deal with them effectively within the law, but also in terms of what's fair and reasonable. So that's hopefully a bit of an overview from me that you found helpful. And I'm going to hand over to Paul Harrison now, who's going to give a bit of an executive summary and an overview of some of our published statistics. Bear with us. There we go.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Paul. So we're going to look through initially the key takeaway points. So that quarter 4 showed a continued growth in the number of cases that we've received and evaluated. COVID-19 has caused a big change in the types of cases which have been brought to the Rail Ombudsman, and the COVID-19 and UK lockdown has had an impact on the case handling time for cases. Okay, so initially, we can see that, as I said, new cases referred to Rail Ombudsman were up significantly on quarter 3 at 21%. Cases evaluated by the Ombudsman were up 35%, and there were slight changes in the cases found to be in scope or transferred to the consumer advocacy bodies. You can see here over the past year, you can see the increase month on month, December being the only month which was actually lower, probably due to seasonality. You get a decrease of people raising complaints in December, and that was then picked up in January, as you can see where there's a big spike. And then in March, we can see the first actual significant drop that we've had since launch, and that's the early sign of COVID-19 and the lockdown, the reduced number of cases coming through to us from that. Looking at the cases we've transferred to Transport Focus or London TravelWatch, this has continued to decrease every quarter quite significantly. So we're now down to around 2% are currently going to London TravelWatch at the moment. Okay, and then looking at COVID-19, we can see initially when we first launched, that's in the pale blue colour, during the cutover periods, we can see as we moved, as we went live, which is in the darker purple, following cutover, we can see this general increase as an upward trend right the way through, up until March, where the UK lockdown started, and then we can see cases have sort of dropped to about between sort of half and 2/3 what we were receiving before that. So I've looked at the different time ranges to compare the types of cases that we've received during these different periods. So from the start of UK lockdown through to the 26th of August, when these figures were run, it's 156 days. So I've compared this to the previous year and the 156 days before the lockdown. And we can see how it's shaped the different types of cases being sent through to us. So as a percentage of the total, it's easy to show on the graphs here, you can see that there's been a massive increase in the number of consumers, or the percentage of cases relating to consumers seeking refunds on season tickets and essentially travel they weren't able to take over the lockdown periods. There's been a huge reduction in the number of complaints about train service performance, staff conduct, and quality on the train. So it's essentially flipped around from how it was previously. And then the amount of time taken to close cases, there's been a small reduction in the time it's taken to close simple cases. They've reduced by, on average, 1.2 days per case. Complex have increased in the handling time by roughly 2.7 days, and that gives us an overall increase in handling time around 2 days per case.
Thank you, Bill. So hopefully that sort of sets some context that Judith kindly provided, and some sort of trend in terms of where we've been. I'd only add to that, obviously, the offices were closed from the 23rd of March. We were very fortunate that our technology held up. There was, in truth, a variance in response from some of the operators, but we managed to work through. I guess that's why at the end we tried to show the impact on days for cases, because it's been minimal. There has been a severe drop-off in cases in recent times, because obviously there's as you well know, there's a lot less people being travelling. We know that over the last couple of weeks, based on the reports that we're receiving from David Sidebottom and the team, that there are some increases that are starting to happen. But in effect, we are mindful that our case numbers will stay lower than they were trending. Had we continued up the trajectory that was being forecast, we were probably moving towards somewhere in the region of 5,000 cases for the year, and obviously we now know that that will be significantly lower, depending on when we start to see sort of a more robust recovery. So we are obviously, as with everyone, we're trying to adapt to that. So and with that, we're more than happy to answer any questions that you might have. I apologise in advance. We didn't show some of the key statistics for Q1 that they've not been published yet, and we've been informed today there's a slight delay. So obviously we're mindful of that.
Arthur, you're on mute. We can't hear you. You're still on mute, Arthur. I think you seem to. The mute sign is still showing in your on your square, Arthur. Do you want?
Maybe while we're waiting for Arthur to sort out some of his technical difficulties, I could fill the gap with some questions.
That would be great, Karen.
That's all right. So thank you very much. That was very interesting, particularly in terms of the stats and the data there. Can I just ask a couple of questions about the data? Firstly, as you referenced, some of it is quite old. We're in September now, and you showed us some data that goes up to March. So I'm interested in how frequently you produce the data, and particularly how effectively you share that, I think, with the scheme council. Obviously, the more recent the data, the more helpful it is, both in terms of information and helping some of the TOCs to improve their performance. And then secondly, how you're sharing that information with the TOCs and how you're using that to drive improvements for customers. Thank you. So
if they bear with me, and Paul will probably add something to this, and if Judith wants to, she may also. For yourselves and for the scheme council, you have what we call super reporting. So you've got access to most of the data that's produced, allowing for the fact that obviously we are obliged to keep the privacy of consumer data private, but you have access to all the numbers on an ongoing basis with immediate effect that are produced and go through our system. You can produce your own reports. You can also search for information. So from a data point of view, the system that we use, the CMS system that we use, which obviously up until 2 years ago, the industry didn't have. So where the complaints are lodged, passengers can track their complaints on an ongoing basis. And in terms of data, you have super reporting, so you can see a whole field of data. Almost everything that we have, you have, and the scheme council have, and it's very reliable. The system is very reliable. It's held with us for the last 2 years. It was bespoke built, for the Rail Ombudsman, for the service that we offer. So it's not an off-the-shelf system. It's been built and operates, to fulfil the role that we have. The TOCs also receive ongoing reporting, and I suppose and Paul will add to this, that we do a service review with each of the TOCs where we will sit down or remotely now, but we were sitting down with them, visiting most of them, and on a period basis, we'll go through every complaint that they've had, all the information we have about the complaint, why the complaint existed, any remedies that would have prevented the complaint. And again, there's separate reporting that I think Paul and our engagement manager, a gentleman called Matt Thomas, shares with them on an ongoing basis. The TOCs also have access to a members line, so they can actually come through and discuss and debate how they might remedy certain elements on an ongoing basis as part of the service we offer. I don't know whether Paul or Judith have anything to add.
Well, there's the publications. You mentioned the quarterly publications are obviously on the website as well.
Of course.
Yeah.
So to be perfectly honest, from the offset, at one stage we were supplying weekly reporting, monthly reporting, quarterly reporting on an ongoing basis.
Initially we did daily as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, the actual, we publish in line with the ORR, so we publish the same time periods as them on the same day as them, which is roughly, it's up to a 6-month lag from the actual time that the data which is in there, it's between 3 and 6 months delayed, but that is in line with ORR.
Yeah, the only other point that I'd add to that is that because there has been a lot of debate around transparency and information, and there is a suggestion that we might do some form of comparison from 2018 to 2020 to compare the data that was available in 2018 to the data that's now available, to see if there is any real gaps that we might fulfill in terms of that data. And we'd very much welcome that situation, because ultimately, apart from direct customer data, that obviously, you know, we all know that there are regulations around that. We everything that we have, we supply, and we supply at a level which, to be perfectly honest, most ombudsman schemes, particularly that are not regulated, you know, don't supply information at this level. It's fairly unique to the rail industry, it's our belief.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you for that. I think I'd just make the observation that a 6-month delay in reporting just because the ORR fits in with their timescale is perhaps not something that you want to continue to do, and maybe you reflect on your own service standards for that, but it's a matter for you.
Again, if you were to speak to Susan, she can draw, or her team can draw on the information in real time. So
that's helpful, thank you.
Forward.
Thank you. Delighted to find my voice again. Sorry about that technical glitch. Emma, you had your hand up.
Yeah, hello Billy, I'm Emma Gibson, the director of London TravelWatch. It is a real shame that Susan's on holiday, because I know, just on the data point, I know that she's expressed frustrations with me in the past about the kind of the level and quality and timeliness of the data that they're getting from you. So I think there's obviously kind of a mismatch between what you think you're providing and what we're finding useful. And just kind of on that theme still, kind of following on from Karen's question, is you know, one of the things that the Red Quadrant report suggested was providing a dashboard with the various kind of indicators on of the kind of information that people would find useful who are kind of, you know, looking at your performance, like the ADR Scheme Council. So I just wondered if you've got what you've decided to do about that that idea of creating a dashboard with the headings that were suggested.
Well, we've responded to the review that was commissioned by the regulator by Red Quadrant. In truth, we responded to the immediate recommendations, which was originally meant to be within a 6-month period. I don't want to bring in the COVID element as being an excuse, but not just us, but several parties have obviously been distracted by that. So we've responded to the immediate, and we've sat with our board and looked at the immediate. If I'm being perfectly honest, our board are yet to go through the next stages of the recommendations made. I would add that the majority of the recommendations made were either already in flight or we're very positive about. The dashboard element, we'd probably need a bit more time to give you a structured response, to be honest. And it probably I need to involve others in that debate before we would respond. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, essentially it's a dashboard of the kind of things that you've been talking about. It's basically saying what's useful data, and you know, what would we how are we going to produce it, how often are we going to produce it. So it's not actually different from what you've already been talking about. It's just producing it in a regular format that's offering the kind of answering the kind of questions that people have got. So it shouldn't be too far off topic, really.
Yeah, and as I said, the vast majority of what is in the report, you know, we aggressively agree with. We're just at various stages of sort of responding and sort of engaging, you know, our board and our team around the recommendations thus far. Again, we've responded to the initial, the immediate, and we are engaging. In fact, Judith has a meeting with Sarah Robinson tomorrow, and Matt Thomas and various members of the team, so we're currently engaged. I would be surprised if we don't alter our reporting in some way, shape or form to meet the needs of the requirements that are there. So that would be my response.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other particular questions that anyone wants to raise? Jackie, you have your hand up? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think two parts probably to my question. One is about what your targets are in terms of TOC and customer satisfaction, or view that you are fair and impartial. So have you set yourself the same target of level of satisfaction that you would expect to see both in TOCs and customers, or is one of those groups more important to you? And the second part of that question is, one of the things that would help to increase customer belief that you're fair and balanced would be if there was access to more case studies. I know you referred earlier to using case studies, but I think there's a limited number on your website. And I think more case studies would show customers a bit more about where you've been successful, or why you've taken particular views.
So I'm tempted to invite Judith to answer the first element of the question, which is around our sort of our remit and our targets from a passenger and consumer perspective against that of the industry and satisfaction levels. And then if she'd allow me, I'd probably answer the second half, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's no problem at all. I mean, as Billy said right at the outset, we're not a consumer champion, and we're not an industry representative. So to have both with the same level of satisfaction at 100%, in terms of that would be would be the ultimate. There are certainly no targets in terms of that from a level of fairness and impartial. We address every case on its own merits, and we'll look at the facts of the case. As I said, we'll look at what's missing, see if we can help the parties get that equally balanced. In terms of kind of case splits and numbers, we don't actually publish figures to the Ombudsman team until they're published outright, because we'd never want anybody thinking that, oh, this month I've found in favour more of a consumer and a TOC and vice versa. So we look at every case on its own merits, and there is a robust quality process that cases go through, and there's a sign-off process as well for adjudications. So unless the consumer is satisfied with an outcome that a TOC has put forward, and it only ever settles in mediation if the consumer agrees. So if the consumer's not satisfied with what's been put forward in mediation, it will move forward to an adjudication, at which point there'll be a formal written decision with reasons, and which will be subject to a sign-off. So from that perspective, there is an impartiality that runs through that, and we would look at every case on its own merits. And as I say, in terms of what we look at for satisfaction, we'd want both consumers and RSPs to be equally satisfied, and if I could get that 100%, I'll be happy. So I hope that answers that part of the question.
Oh, sorry, can I just come back on that? So presumably you have got an internal target for satisfaction that you're looking to achieve. I mean, you're saying 100%. Is that what your actual internal target is?
Well, I mean, I don't think we have an internal target for satisfaction.
No, we certainly don't have an internal target for satisfaction, and nor would any ombudsman, and nor should they, because ultimately then you would be directing the actions of the Ombudsman to say, right, this is the level we need you to find in favour or partially in favour of, and that would influence them in the wrong way. They should look at the evidence and make decisions based on the evidence that's gathered, and ultimately the outcome for, you know, I can't speak for all ombudsmen, but ultimately you will find that, you know, I've got a consumer background. So my background was, I was an executive with the Kingfisher Group and with the Home Retail Group. So, you know, satisfaction targets aren't new to me as a retailer. You know, they're very much part of what you do, but not for an ombudsman. An ombudsman has to impartially look at the evidence and make a decision. And if our satisfaction rates go down year on year, but the evidence has been reviewed, our process is reviewed, and our standards are met and kept, then that would be, you know, that would be the answer. So no, we're not targeting a huge increase in satisfaction levels. In fact, in terms of the Ipsos Mori independent report we had, apart from the fact that in truth we didn't have as much data as we probably needed, because we had started in November 19, we weren't really able to take cases because of the cutover period in the agreements we had made with the industry. So cases weren't being looked at by various parts of the industry, including yourselves. We didn't really actively start to start looking at cases till January. Obviously, we're a brand new organisation. As you're well aware, some of the signposting initially, and still some of the signposting, wasn't really adequate. Ombudsmen don't advertise. We're not a sales organisation. We shouldn't be out there trying to, you know, draw numbers in. That's not our remit either. So actually, the data they had to look at Ipsos Mori, we knew would be probably less than we would have wanted. And we also knew that quite a lot of the consumers they were going to speak to, sadly, have been consumers that we'd had to say, sorry, we can't help you because. So it's unfortunate that we find ourselves in our, you know, almost in our second year in a situation where, if I'm being perfectly honest, I think we'll probably get better value from the data from the beginning of the year that we got, because the numbers are far larger and a far better indication of the service that's offered. But no, we aren't targeting satisfaction levels, and I know that's unusual language, particularly for
perhaps I used the wrong word there. Perhaps I shouldn't say, do you want consumers and or TOCs to be satisfied? Perhaps I should say, do you want consumers and TOCs to have a perception of you that you are fair and balanced in your judgments? And I would think that that was within the role of the Ombudsman to want that. So what are you going to do to increase consumer perception that you're fair and balanced in your judgments? As an individual, they may not be happy with the outcome, but it is important that they have faith in the service, that your judgments were fair and balanced.
Well, of the Ipsos Mori report, in truth, we would like to have seen better transparency and confidence levels. I guess in part some of that would be due to the fact that we're a new organisation, so it takes some time to build trust and confidence. The second element is partly in that red quadrant review, whereby there's certain information that we probably should be publishing that would help people to feel that we were more transparent and impartial. So we're certainly we're active in that, guys. In fact, we had the rail board meeting yesterday where we engaged them on several elements of that, which were around transparency and what we'd like to do moving forward. So yes, we'd like to see improvement in that regard.
Okay. And increasing the number of case studies?
I think yes. The answer is yes. We agree. We probably should produce more case studies, and we would like to see ourselves, and we'll endeavour to try and produce more case studies. We think they're very, very useful, and they help. And we are committed to try and produce more case studies. We agree, aggressively agree.
Okay. Alan, you wanted to come in, I think.
Yeah, please. So I wanted to change the subject slightly, or change the angle slightly. The case studies and examples that I've read are very much focused around individual or resolution of individuals' issues, often around either refunds or some kind of compensation or recompense. Now, I note part of your remit is to look at positive feedback loops for systematic change. And in your presentation, you mentioned a couple of examples, for example, of passenger assistance that had failed in one example in London, and I'm aware of examples in Worthing that have been reported to you. So I wondered, really, I wanted you to comment on what steps you take to go beyond the individual and to look for systematic problems, and what you do, if you could perhaps give some examples of steps that you've taken to address these bigger picture issues for passenger benefit.
I'm happy to take that. So yeah, absolutely, you're right. The case studies that we have published are centred around learnings from individual scenarios and cases, but there is a more general approach to the recommendations that we make. So obviously our learnings are derived from individual cases, and we're looking for opportunities to improve and increase the impact that we have all the time. And one of the things that we have attended the complaints working group and given feedback on the issues. We're actually taking steps at the moment to investigate setting up our own working group, which I actually discussed with Susan last week, in order to make sure that the learnings can be directed. In terms of our role is to look at the individual issues and to recognise and spot trends, report them back to the industry so that the industry can assist. We don't have, for example, own initiative powers like some of the kind of the public sector ombudsman, but it's certainly an important role that we're looking to improve and increase that impact all the time. But there are certainly examples where we've addressed those and more widely to the collective, and we've made recommendations in our annual review as well, more widely to the industry. Do you have anything to add?
And how do you feel those recommendations have been received? Do you feel that they've been picked up and will be acted on?
I think that I can't speak for every recommendation for every train operator, but certainly we have had positive responses to the recommendations. They are, as we alluded to earlier on, we do have account management meetings as well with the train operators where we give them individual feedback on their own recommendations and on industry recommendations, and there's definitely an appetite to receive those recommendations. We do internally log where we've had responses and action has been taken as well. So I would say there's a positive response to those. Quite often if action can't be taken for a reason, maybe a technical reason, for example, then that's explained. But as I've said, we've seen resulted from staff training, changes of information on the websites that's available to passengers. So we have seen positive responses to those. It is still relatively early days in terms of some of the impacts that we can have, that we've seen so far. So kind of building up that that kind of knowledge and database of the industry, of the recommendations. In some respects, it is quite quite early days, but I've definitely seen a positive response to the recommendations that we've made.
I think just really the thing that I'd like you to take away from my comments are that it's not, for a lot of people, it's not about personal recompense. It's not about personal compensation or about their particular experience. It's about trying to use their experience to solve what is a bigger issue. And I think sometimes it's useful to be able to report back to people about what changes have been made as a response to their problem, rather than just trying to offer them some kind of compensation. But that's just really my comments. Thank you.
That's brilliant. Thank you.
And thank you for that. We've made that point, and it's a very valid point and well received. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that, Alan. Anybody else got a question at this point? Abdi.
Do you have anything from the public?
It's just a quick one about on the internet. There's some negative comments and 1-star, 2-star ratings on the internet about the Ombudsman scheme, from some unhappy customers that are dealing with the organization. Do you normally, if you see such comments, do you normally follow them up and try to sort of reason with those customers?
I mean, I think just generally in terms of the feedback, I'd say that along with other ombudsman schemes, where we are issuing a decision, it comes with a party that's not going to be happy with that decision. A little bit alluding back to the comment that was made earlier on in terms of satisfaction. Unfortunately, sometimes it's very difficult to extract the satisfaction from the decision. So even if the process has gone through, in terms of the average days to close off a case, they're within an SLA. The case has moved through fairly swiftly. So even if you were happy with the process but didn't receive the outcome that you wanted, it is very difficult to extract that. I think if we see something within a review that it doesn't quite sit right, we're not quite sure that happened, and we could go back and help. So for example, we had one on one of the other schemes that we operate a couple of weeks ago, where someone said they couldn't get through to that scheme. So we pick up on that and see if there's a technical issue that's preventing. So from that respect, yes we would. I'm not necessarily saying we wouldn't, but if somebody's not happy with a decision, then they're perfectly within their rights to express that via a review, whether that's a 1-star, or if they're happy with the decision, they're entitled to express a 5-star review.
Unfortunately, there isn't an ombudsman who's got a 5-star review on average, or a 4-star review on average. And when we've historically within other schemes, if we look for a level of complicity, I don't like using the word satisfaction, but satisfaction in terms of the process, when we find in favour of consumers across all the schemes, then obviously there is a much higher rate of satisfaction. Unfortunately, that isn't our role. Our role is to look at the evidence and to make a decision based on the evidence that is fair. Sometimes we can't extract the evidence we need. Sometimes the evidence doesn't find in favour of the consumer, and you would expect a certain percentage of that audience, not to be satisfied. But if we see anything online, as I guess do all our organisations, where we think it should be followed up on, we do follow up on it. But again, it's synonymous with schemes that make balanced decisions based on evidence.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. I just wanted to check with Mike, Mike Brown in particular. He has more experience, direct experience of working with you and colleagues. I don't know if there's anything, Mike, you particularly wanted to raise, or are you happy with what you've heard?
Well, I mean, one of the things that we talked about, discussed with Susan, or Susan discussed with me rather, was about out of scope cases and about decisions that were made. I mean, there are. I mean, you've already said that the numbers that come to us have reduced, you know, significantly, and that's definitely true. And you know, that's obviously a good improvement. It's just we do sometimes come across cases where there seems to have been a concentration on these are admittedly more complex cases. You know, so they don't get referred back to the RO because they're you know, they're not so easy to recognise and send back. So we accept that they're kind of more complex cases, but there does seem to be sometimes a concentration on getting the passenger to state their outcome, and then sort of concentrating on that, which is a fair thing to do, but sometimes you know, in our experience, passengers don't always sort of, they might want an outcome that you know, you can't deliver or we can't deliver, but there might still also be an outcome in there in amongst the rest of it that could be delivered as in scope rather than transferred as out of scope, and it was just sort of those kind of you know, it's more questions about your you know, the techniques that you use to as you said, the kind of inquisitorial approach, and kind of what the outcomes of that approach are. Sometimes, I mean, another example would be where there's information buried in a complex case or a lengthy case, and it's kind of battened onto as a detail, says right, and it looks like, okay, this means it's not in our scope, so we'll then pass it. I mean, like I said, there's not many of these, but they are ones we have seen. So I just would welcome your comments on that kind of thing.
I mean, obviously, from a process perspective, the cases are triaged for scope when they come in from a passenger. We don't always have the benefit of the train operator's response to that at that point either. But Mike, what I would say, if you wouldn't mind, if you could send me some examples of that through, then we can have a look at them internally and perhaps take that one offline, just so that I can have a clearer picture of the examples that you're alluding to, and then we can pick up, because as I say, any learnings that we can glean, we're always very, very happy to receive. So if you wouldn't mind, we could perhaps pick that one up offline.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
But can I also say that that we have actively suggested that our scope is revisited, because we feel there are cases that we have the armory, we are capable of looking at and should be looking at, but currently fall outside of scope. In fact, that probably ties in with something I was going to ask the board actually, which is one of our recommendations was to reduce the element of the time spans for complaints that sit with the TOCs to 20 days. For us, we see this as quite a big issue. Being come to us that are initially ineligible, but based on the fact that they've come to us too early, our view is that 40 days is far too long, and that 20 days, the vast majority of the industry achieved the 20 days. And I think they're both embroiled. I think there's cases that we transfer, and it's only 2% currently, and has stayed at 2% over a number of quarters. So I think, you know, it is a marginal amount, but really, I think there's sometimes we're passing you things we think we're better placed to deal with, but are out of scope. And also, I would like the opinion of the board in terms of how we might move forward this moving to 20 days, because the Ombudsman Association have already reported that they feel that 20 days would be a best practice. So we have suggested to the Scheme Council that this would be a chance of the industry sort of showing real impact, sort of taking a lead in that, guys. I also know that Susan's very, very pro it as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that's something we'd want to take on. I mean, we'd look for the shortest period possible, and it does look a very slow process at the moment. So perhaps that's something we can discuss outside as to how best to have a sort of combined push on that. Unless Emma or anybody particularly wants to add anything immediately on that.
No, I mean, I think, as you know, it's something that we're supportive of, and I can certainly kind of talk to Susan when she gets back about how we might be able to help you to achieve that.
Yeah. Okay, that's I appreciate that, Brilliant. It's be a good way forward. I just wanted to, related to that in a sense, I suppose it is about how we look forward and how we keep the Ombudsman scheme dynamic, because it strikes me it's by necessity almost it has to be reactive. It's reactive to complaints, but there are things that you could probably foresee are going to be the issues of the future post-COVID, as we get people coming back to work, as and when that happens. People's concerns are going to be very different from what they were before, and Paul touched on this, that, you know, the shift obviously moved to season tickets away from crowding, but I think it's fairly clear that there's going to be a focus on crowding again, safety, security, management of passengers. If there's a view that train operators aren't doing enough to protect passengers through either mask wearing or whatever it is, or cleanliness of trains, they're going to be the new issues of 2021, you would expect. And do you just wait until you get a significant number of complaints and then start to change things, or is the work already underway, or should be underway, with the train operators to say, look, what are you doing now? What can we do to alleviate the problem before it even happens?
I say that. So to some extent, I think it's probably a mixture of both. To be honest, you know, we have had conversations with the industry, with Susan. I think you probably see them potentially slightly before we do, in terms of that cut over, that 8 weeks that we'd like to become 4 weeks, so that we can see the issues sooner. But there is a time lag to when we see the issues, and to some respects we can only report on what we see. But we do speak to stakeholders within the industry, such as, you know, yourselves, the ORR, the train operators themselves at our regular review meetings. So we do have a look and an eye to what might be coming from that respect. In terms of making kind of individual recommendations, you know, to some extent we can only make recommendations on what we've seen through the casework, but we can certainly have discussions with train operators so that they understand their obligations in advance, and that's, you know, something that we'll be looking to do through the training, so that they understand what their obligations are, and also through the webinar content. So I think it's a mixture of both, to be honest.
Okay, because
I think we're all in a very similar territory there, aren't we? I think there are debates that are going on around how the shape of complaints might change and what the impacts are. unfortunately, I don't think we have the answers in that regard, and have enough information to actually put forward recommendations. We did speak to the Scheme Council, and we have got a slot in for the rail liaison group where it's being discussed. Susan's attending, as are some talks and some independents to start talking about it imminently. But we've got very little so far. We know that we've had some queries through the advice line, but very little. Because of the volumes of people travelling are quite low, as you well know. I think that sort of is we know it's coming. We're not sure what guys. I guess there's a service guys. There's some very difficult elements within all that, isn't there, around responsibility and how it will be policed, etc., which again we've spoken to Susan about. We're sort of we're not quite there yet, I don't think.
Well, I think
how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'd really urge you to get there, Billy, as quickly as you can. And I realise these things are difficult. Guessing the future is a fool's game to some extent. But I wouldn't want to be in the situation, in 9 months' time, where we're starting to get, and coming back to Karen's point earlier, if data comes through rather belatedly, and then we're starting to see issues about cleanliness or safety, security, that feeling of being looked after is emerging as an issue, and it's only then that that's starting to get fed back to the industry, because that would be, it really would be sort of a backward step. We need to be, as an industry, I think the industry needs to be very forward-looking on this, and I think they're slightly waiting for the avalanche rather than getting out of the way of it and thinking of ways of dealing with it. So that would be my encouragement, I think, to you, and I think we'd give any support. I know Susan would, in saying, look, we're starting to see the signs of this. I think a good example was season tickets. I think we saw very quickly what was happening around season tickets. It was pretty predictable, in all honesty, and I think some more proactive work could be done around these issues.
Just the information that David Sidebottom's supplying, and I know that you working much more collaboratively with Transport Focus is very, very useful. We're obviously taking a lot of heed of that in terms of what is sort of how it's building and how people are feeling. So I think it's a very valid point.
Okay, thanks. Can I ask one? I'm going to take the liberty of being chair and asking one more question. This is a bit more on governance, but it does affect how passengers will see things. Get a slight feeling that the Ombudsman being run by the industry, with the industry, some would say perhaps for the industry, but that's too cynical, hasn't been a success, and hence the need for the ORR to become involved. Do you see that things could have been done differently and better from the start, in view of the relationship with the industry?
Yeah, I think in terms of the Red Quadrant report, I think what I took from it is that given the fact there's never been a rail ombudsman in the UK before, it was clear that the rail ombudsman is efficient and effective, and it has been working. I think we accept the fact that the Ombudsman Association were very, very mindful of the shape of the industry and the way that the industry works. And for us to receive full membership, they wanted certain assurances from the industry. And one of those was an independent committee that was properly represented, that would support the independence of the Ombudsman, and also, hold it to scrutiny in some regard, as much as that is possible. From a governance point of view, what our observation is that basically because it's based on a collaboration, and because because of the newness of it and the difficulty in almost getting it to be responsive, lots of decisions have taken a long time, and it's not uncommon to come away from a scheme council without any decisions made. And ultimately, if you're trying to build any new organisation, and this is a new scheme, you know, new systems from day one, we were new to the industry, so there's lots of learning. That hasn't really worked, and I don't see it as being the best model going forward. We welcome the fact that the regulator takes a more central role, and in the landscape, the more successful ombudsman that they're synonymous with the regulator taking a much more active role. So my answer would be, I'm not sure we could have foreseen where we are, but we welcome the change. But I don't think that you could say that the Rail Ombudsman hasn't been successful, because ultimately it was active from day one. Its service levels have been maintained at a very high level. We've never dropped a service point in a year and 9 months. And even from Susan's perspective, last time she visited us here, she said, effectively, I can see that in terms of what you do, it's very efficient and very effective. And so I'm glad it's changing. I don't think it would be fair to criticise how it was built. There were so many unknowns, I think,
okay.
Our response.
Okay, no, thank you for that. Well, that's very helpful. Emma, I'm not sure if you wanted to add a question, or you're comfortable with where we've got to. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we're over time now.
Yeah, we've got a bit of time actually, because we had an earlier paper, but I wanted to give people the chance to ask their questions. But I'm certainly happy that we've had a good discussion now. So thank you to Judith and to Billy and to Paul. I can't see any more, but I assume Paul's still there. But thanks for being open with us and having, as I say, a good discussion. I think there are things we want to follow up, obviously, around data sharing and the dashboard and having the up-to-date information, as well as that sort of proactive approach. But I think through Susan and others, we can keep that discussion going.
And again, could I just say thank you very much to Susan for all her support. I mean, she obviously got a wealth of knowledge. And again, we are, you know, we're still very, very new to the industry. We haven't got the experience that many of you have. And Susan's been very, very valuable. Not unchallenging, but we expect that.
Good. Well, I'm sure that will carry on. Susan will keep the challenges, I'm sure. But
thanks very much for your time. Much appreciated.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Okay. Well, why don't we have a break now? I'm sure you're all desperate for a cup of tea or whatever. What time is it now? If we could come together at 25 past, it'll give people time just to freshen up. And thanks for your questioning and ideas there. It's useful. Okay.
Okay.
You've got glorious weather down there, Jackie, I imagine, down in Somerset.
Hi, Arthur. Yeah, it's absolutely boiling. It's lovely.
Oh,
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
It's
I'm
good of you.
back tomorrow, but
Back tomorrow. Is this part of the house, part of the move, or just generally visiting? Not your move, but your daughter's move.
Yeah, she's moved. Yes.
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 So you're
yes,
not having to help with that. She's done that already.
She's already in place. So I've come to stay with her for a few days to
lovely.
Just see for myself what a beautiful village she's in. I haven't seen an electric scooter down here. But there are lots of cyclists. Lots of cyclists.
I bet there are. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a nice part of the world to be.
Yeah, no, it's lovely. Yeah, it's absolutely lovely. Yeah, so I managed to get back in time. I thought I would be late.
Good.
For the restart.
That's worked well. Good timing.
Yeah, good.
Right. Well, we'll just wait for you to come back, and then we'll go straight on to the casework report. But I think that was quite a useful session actually with the Ombudsman, as far as you can get with these things. But I think there are some good follow-ups that we can certainly, in terms of getting data and getting up-to-date information. I think we can keep pushing at that.
Yeah, I think it was a useful set of questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks for prompting some of those, Emma. And I think it was good, useful discussion. But I think there is going to be a lot of change within the Ombudsman service. I think it will be important that we do keep pushing for the passenger, because I think all the talk will be about finance and governance and lots of things like that, which may not necessarily help the passenger. So I'm sure Mike and Susan and others will keep pushing at that door.
Yeah.
What did you think of it, Mike?
I thought the questions were really good, and I think they covered most of the sorts of issues. Even if they were slightly different in form, they covered most of the issues, practically all the issues really, that certainly Susan was concerned about, and more generally we are.
Good. Okay. Well, as they will follow those up, and that's always the risk with these appearances. You have that hour or whatever, and then it gets pushed aside for a while. And I think it's important that we follow up on some of the answers that we got, and particularly around getting up-to-date information. I think is going to be important. Right. I think most people are returning. Welcome to Shahid.
Hi, thank you.
Hi, Shahid. Right, we'll come on to finance in just a couple of minutes, Shahid. But we'll do casework first. I think we can probably kick off.
Yeah, okay, I'll do that. Obviously, I'm standing in for Susan, but Mike's here as well to help answer any questions. So I'll just kind of highlight a few things from Susan's report that I think are interesting. So we're having a lot of success at the moment, I would say, with appeals, despite the complexity of the cases that we're taking on. I mean, as you'll have heard from the Ombudsman, they're taking on some of the more straightforward cases, if you like, that we used to deal with. And so a lot of the cases we're dealing with are to do with policy of train operators, for example. But despite that, only less than 25% of our cases have an unsuccessful outcome, which I think is really good. We're getting also this quarter, we've had an unusual amount of very positive feedback from consumers, people who've put in complaints to us. I don't quite know why, but we've just had a lot of unsolicited emails from people whose complaints we've dealt with, saying what an excellent service they received, even if they didn't get the outcome that they wanted, about how helpful our staff have been. So that has been a really positive thing that's been happening recently. So as you can see from Susan's graphs, casework, we had a dip in cases in May, but they've been steadily rising ever since. I've had quite a large number of complaints about Eurostar. And the closure rate for cases, which is generally within 35 days, is still very good. So in terms of the kind of classification of complaints, still getting lots of kind of refund complaints, and largely they're about a lack of response from the transport operator, an initial lack of response. So they're coming to us to ask us to get involved and get them a response. So I think that would be my very kind of brief overview of Susan's paper, and I'm happy for Mike and I to take questions. I know, Karen, you had one that you wanted to kind of, that I asked if you could hold over to this section.
Yeah, just an observation about how you think complaints are going to be increasing or otherwise in the future. There is an observation, it's not the first time I've made it, that you're only running data up to June and it's already halfway through September, so that's 2.5 months on. I think it might have been more helpful to have given us the data at the end of August. That would still have been a reasonable time frame to turn it around.
Yeah, sure. I'll make a note of that. I can't say exactly why Susan isn't got more recent data. I know that she does it on the stats on a quarterly basis, and so maybe that's because this meeting isn't kind of quite in sync with the quarterly reporting, I guess. But I'll certainly ask that question of her. Karen,
well, I would have thought that she was reporting to us. That would have been I'm not sure who else she does the quarterly reporting to, but I would have thought that we're a primary audience for it.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps to just sort of intervene in that, I suppose as we go forward, and it's a fair point, Karen, I think obviously having the most up-to-date information is useful. Of course, the report now will go both to ourselves and to Transport Focus. So there will need to be probably a bit of a decision made, and the board can make that decision really, what is most useful. We have always done it on a quarterly reporting cycle, and broadly speaking, that's tended to fit in with board meetings, but not entirely. I think you're always going to have a bit of a sort of a disconnect on occasion where there might be, as in this case, I suppose 6 weeks out, then, or more than that, probably 8 weeks out, then we do need to have that sort of updated information, even if it's in brief, or verbally alongside a report, then I think that would be useful. But I think we need to have a quarterly cycle as well, because otherwise it will become a bit disconnected, I think, between the two boards. So that's really why I think why Susan wants to stick to her quarterly reporting. But I'm open to other thoughts on that, how we do it best. Obviously, the more recent information, the better. But it also, I don't want her doing lots of reports. I suppose that's the key. She does her quarterly, and then if she's then going to do another monthly to add on to that, and then get back into her next quarter, it's going to take quite a lot of her time. So we've just got to get a balance there, I think.
Chair, I think if I remember correctly, some of the data that she uses is not our data. It's from other organisations like TfL. So we are subject to their timetables. So perhaps the report that we need is not all of the data will be as up to date as possible. And I may be wrong, but that's from my memory.
Yeah, I think it's a fair challenge, Karen. I think we should definitely look at this and see what the best way of getting the up-to-date information is, as long as it's not, as I say, adding to the workload too much in what's quite a small team. But let's take that up with Susan. I'm sure Emma can follow that up.
Okay, I mean, it was leading on to my. I take the point about needing to be proportionate, but it's the question is, you know, we assume that complaints are going to go up again, and have been increasing for the last couple of months, although not evidence from the report there. How are you ensuring that you're matching resources? Is there an issue there?
Well, so as far as I'm aware, Karen, there isn't an issue at the moment matching resources. Obviously, we have a fixed number of caseworkers, so we can't add to that. That's not an option. I mean, yes, we are expecting to be handling more cases as more people return to work. I mean, that's common sense, right? Or, you know, more people return to public transport in general. I mean, I think some analysis that Susan's doing at the moment is looking a bit more closely about how much time she's spending on transport focus cases as opposed to London TravelWatch cases. And that's kind of certainly kind of analysis that we can share with you. And just kind of initial observations at the moment, and Mike, I don't know if you would agree with this or not, is that the cases that we're getting from transport focus are tending to be a lot more complex and more time consuming. So I think that that's something that we need to kind of keep an eye on in terms of trends, and be talking to transport focus about, in terms of making sure that we're being, the balance of the hours spent from the various organisations is actually balanced. Mike, is there anything that you want to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say actually on both sides, on both Transport Focus and TravelWatch, that cases are, because they're not straightforward delay, repay, refunds, or the things that we used to do prior to the Ombudsman. They're much more to do with policy issues, and of course, recently there's because of COVID, it's been the policy on season ticket refunds for people who are surrendering them as a result of not, of the travel restrictions and not using them. There's been the issues of Eurostar, where they're having to cancel lots of trains, but only issuing refunds where a train has definitely been cancelled. So there are people that are cancelling themselves and are only being offered vouchers. Some are happy to take those. Some don't feel that the extra time they're being given to rebook is sufficient, because they fear that the COVID issue would still be with us, well into next year. So there's those kinds of things. So on the Transport Focus side, again, it's policy issues. It is season tickets and so on. So they do tend, on the one hand, they can be quite simple in the sense that we can't change the sort of government policy on refunds, but on the other, people are obviously concerned about what is going to happen with season tickets in future and so on. What this is all going to take a rethink on season tickets, on their flexibility, their cost, their all sorts of things. I think are going to come into issue in about because I think one of the things that's come up is that people are just not aware of that they won't get a full pro rata refund, for example, because they've never had to. They've just used the ticket through the year, year after year, so they've rarely had to surrender, and they end up getting less than they would expect. So they then, so that has to be recalculated, checked, and so on, and explained.
Yeah. That's really helpful. Thank you for that sort of background information. I mean, it's clear from Susan's report that there's only a difference of 50 cases in the number of cases closed between ourselves and Transport Focus, and so I will be interested to see the work that Susan's doing around the split there. Thanks.
Okay. Any Jackie, hand raised, I think.
It's only a small thing, but Susan was asking for feedback on the format of the report, as well as the issue Karen was raising about the timing of information. And just one small thing from me on page 3, where there is the pie chart. I don't know if it's just because my site's not very good, but I find it really difficult to see the colours relating to each of those categories.
Okay.
I had to draw lines across for myself eventually to sort of follow it. And I don't know if there's a slightly better way of presenting that, so it's a bit more obvious which slice of the pie chart is which category.
Yeah, there's a few pastel colours there. Perhaps we could make that a bit bolder. would be useful. Okay, I'm sure that can be done.
Thanks. Small thing. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's important. Thanks for that. Any other queries on the report? I think it's good. It's a good run through. Obviously, everything is so exceptional at the moment, but it's how we get prepared for what we've got to assume will be a bit of a bow wave of complaints over the coming, certainly over the winter when people are disgruntled anyway, and we've got people coming back to work. It's going to be a new challenge, I'm sure. So we've got to be prepared for that.
Yeah, and we will, in the pipeline, there's going to be a number of new Eurostar complaints as well that come from the change in the quarantine rules in France.
Oh, right.
So people will be trying to get refunds and vouchers from Eurostar at the moment, and then if they get an outcome they're not happy with, then they'll come to us. So that's kind of something on the horizon that we're kind of preparing for.
That's helpful. And is there any sort of set guide? Obviously, this is all exceptional circumstances. What is their I mean, they have a quarantine policy, I assume, which is basically they're not refunding. Is that how it broadly works? Or?
Yeah, I mean, they're mainly offering vouchers.
Yeah.
But if a service was cancelled, then they'll offer a refund. That's a very kind of general rule of thumb.
Okay, now that may well take a lot of time and may get a bit of attention, I suspect. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, another issue that'll be coming up quite a lot probably will be passengers, kind of, I suppose, what you call biosafety, traveling on trains and so on. That's going to be where people are concerned about the enforcement of face masks and things like that. Those are things that are already beginning to come through to us.
Yeah, and we had the brief discussion with the Ombudsman, didn't we? I'd like us to be, and I'm sure we are being proactive on this, but we need to set out our sort of parameters a bit on this, I suppose, to what are we going to push the industry for, what is reasonable, what isn't reasonable, because one person's view of sort of biosafety will be very different from another's. But at the moment, every operator, I know there are government guidelines, but I think operators are doing a bit of their own things. Some are doing it better than others. So it'd be useful if we can be sort of ahead of the curve a bit on that, as to how we're going to be putting pressure on the industry on that. We can't respond to every single concern about a dirty seat or something, but broadly speaking, I suppose there will be elements that come through that we want to campaign on, perhaps.
Yeah, I'll take that away.
Okay, well, no, thanks for going through the report, Emma. And I must say, I think the feedback that's been coming through is testament to the work of the team. So, Mike, perhaps you can convey that to your colleagues, and I know Emma will. But there's some good work going on, even in difficult situations. So that's really good.
Thank you.
Right, let's move on to finance, if we can, Shahid.
Hi, right, okay. You've been sent the finance report to the 31st of August. Just going to quickly run through what we've got there. The GLA have provided funding for the first half of the year. That's been received at 500,000. The next payment is going to hit our bank account the 1st of October. In terms of expenditure, most of the costs are in line with the forecast. The main variance, well, the slight variance we have is on IT. We've got a positive variance of £8,000 to date. That is just, it's purely a profiling issue. We thought the IT migration would happen slightly earlier than it actually has done, so that will sort itself out in the coming month. Yeah. In terms of the budget and the full year forecast, the main thing to note is that it's highly likely that the GLA will be asking for in-year savings. At the last budget review we identified savings of £12,000 in addition to the £4,000 we would say we'd be willing to give back from the reserves, making a total of £16,000. In addition, in the budgets, we are assuming a £10,000 budget for a office relocation, and we also have £10,000 contingency in there. So that's kind of the cost for the year to date. In addition, I'm not sure if it's already been mentioned or if it will be mentioned later on in this meeting. For future years, in terms of the budget cuts, we submitted the figures to the GLA in the range of 10 to 50%, and we're expecting some clarification in.
So I'm just losing you, Shahid.
Sorry, I was just saying we've submitted the figures to GLA for future years' budgets, in the range of 10 to 50%, and we are expecting some clarification from them in likely to be October and November. Any questions?
Okay, anybody got any questions for Shahid? Just while you're on, Shahid, and thanks for that, that's helpful. On our audit, is that actually complete now in terms of the information that they've got? But
no, they are due to start tomorrow, so they're hoping to do that. They've completed the field work hopefully by the end of the week.
Right.
So if the plan is by the end of the month, we're hoping to have a clear sign off. The only sort of thing that we may need to consider, one of the things they said to me, is that for them to sign it off, we're going to need some evidence of a going concern from the GLA. So that's just something to bear in mind.
Yeah, no, I think that's something we need to pick up separately. But thanks for that.
I have a quick question, if that's okay.
Yes, please.
Arthur, Shahid, it was just to check against that payment that's due to come into our bank account from the GLA at the start of October versus their decision making on in-year cuts. How do those two things work together?
Well, I think until anything's been confirmed, we should just be receiving that payment as profile, so it should be a quarterly payment. And I think something's clarified. It could be the January, there may be a reduction in the January one, or we may need to pay something back.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on finance? All comfortable with that explanation? Okay. Well, Shahid, thank you for running through that quickly. And I think with that, we've just got any other business then before we go into private sessions. Anything anyone wants to raise in the public session? No? Okay, in that case, I resolve that we move into the confidential session. So we